Every other book you own was written to be read. This one was written to be survived. Somewhere along the northern frontier of the Roman world, in a tent pitched at the cold edge of an empire he had never asked to govern, the most powerful man alive sat down at night and wrote a few lines to himself in Greek. Greek was not his first language. Perhaps he chose it because a borrowed tongue puts a small, merciful distance between a man and his own confession. He gave the pages no title. He arranged no chapters. He addressed no one. Centuries later, other hands would call the collection Meditations, but the phrase he seems to have used was plainer than that. Things written to himself. His name was Marcus Aurelius. He commanded the largest army on earth, and he was writing at midnight because he could not command his own mind. Consider what surrounded those pages: a plague crossing his provinces and emptying whole towns, war that would not end, children buried, more than one in a household that had every physician the world could offer, advisors who flattered him, and generals who betrayed him. And in the middle of all of it, a tired man, night after night, writing down the same handful of reminders because he kept forgetting them. This is the paradox we will sit inside tonight. The most durable instructions for peace ever set down came from a man who had almost none. And near the close of the final notebook there is one short passage, written by someone who understood he would not be going home, that folds the whole work into a single image. We will not touch it until the very end. Nothing enters the citadel unless you carry it in. In this exploration, we will move slowly through 13 turnings of that private notebook, the working method of Marcus Aurelius, drawn out of Meditations and set beside the older and stranger traditions that agree with it, the Taoist sages, the teachers of the Buddha's line, the Hermetic masters of Alexandria, the writer of Ecclesiastes, the Sufi poets of the road. We will learn where the boundary of your vlast actually falls, and how much suffering lives on the far side of it. We will learn what the Stoics did in the hour before sleep, and why it steadied men who had every reason to lie awake. We will learn to name a disaster in plain words and watch it shrink to its true size, and we will keep one question open the entire way. A dying emperor, in his last pages, compressed everything he had learned into one small picture, a picture so ordinary that most readers pass over it without stopping. We will stop, but only at the end, when you are ready to see why it is enough. Chapter 1. The Man Who Wrote for No One. A lamp behaves differently when no one is watching it burn. Consider what it means to write a sentence that will never be read. No one to persuade, no reputation to protect, no listener whose opinion might soften the truth by a single degree. Almost everything human beings produce is shaped, somewhere in its making, by the imagined face of a reader. Remove that face, and what remains is either silence or honesty. The notebooks of Marcus Aurelius are what remains. He was, by the accident of adoption, the ruler of the Roman world. He had spent his youth studying rhetoric under a famous tutor named Fronto, and letters between the two of them survive, warm, ordinary letters about sore throats and sleeplessness, and the small vanities of clever men. Later a teacher called Junius Rusticus put into his hands the recorded talks of a former slave named Epictetus, and something in the emperor rearranged itself permanently. He stopped wanting to be admired for his sentences. He began using sentences as instruments. What he wrote in the field, in Greek, in short entries with no argument and no audience, was a maintenance log for a mind under load. And here is the detail that changes how you should hear everything that follows. He repeats himself, constantly. The same handful of reminders return again and again across the notebooks, phrased slightly differently, circled back to like a man checking a lock. Scholars sometimes treat this as a flaw of the text. It is not a flaw. It is the entire method made visible. He kept writing them down because he kept forgetting them. There was once a scribe in a provincial capital whose work was the copying of proclamations, tax edicts, grain allotments, the names of magistrates. His hand was famous for its evenness. Governors requested him by name. Every document that left his desk was public, formal, and false in the way that all official language is false, not lying, exactly, but wearing clothes. Each night, after the lamps in the record house were snuffed, he took out a single page of his own and wrote one line on it, the same line. He had written it for 11 years. A young apprentice discovered the page one evening and could not understand it. The line was not beautiful. It contained no wisdom he could see. It was a plain instruction, the kind of thing a mother tells a child. "Why do you write the same words?" the apprentice asked, "when you could write anything at all?" The scribe held the page to the light. It had grown soft as cloth from handling, and the ink had built up in ridges where the same letters had been traced thousands of times. "Because the page is not where the writing goes," he said. "The page is only where I can see whether it has gone in yet." Then he wrote the line again and went to bed. This discipline of private self-address is older and wider than Rome. The writer of Ecclesiastes speaks in exactly this register. A man of great means talking to his own soul, refusing to flatter it, taking a hard inventory of everything he built and everything it came to. The book reads strangely to those expecting Scripture to comfort, because it is not comforting anyone. It is auditing. Centuries later, the Sufi orders would formalize the same movement under the name of self-reckoning, the nightly practice of calling yourself to account before anything else does it for you. The instruction across all of them is identical in shape. Do not wait for the world to tell you what you are. Ask in private while there is still time to answer. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private meditations, the soul takes the color of its habitual thoughts, and so the work of a life is not the acquisition of grand principles, but the daily re-dyeing of the cloth, because the color fades. That is his real teaching, and it is unglamorous, and it is why the book has outlived every monument he ever commissioned. So here is the practice, and you can begin it tonight. Take one sheet of paper, not a journal, not an app, not anything designed to be reviewed. One page that no one will ever read, which you may destroy whenever you wish. On it, write the single reminder you most need and most reliably forget, not a goal. A reminder, something like "I do not have to answer immediately," or "her illness is not a verdict on me," or "I have survived worse and forgot that too." Write it tonight. Write it again tomorrow night. Write the same words for 2 weeks. You will feel foolish around the 4th night. That feeling is the instruction beginning to take. What would you write if you knew with certainty that no one would ever see it? The speed with which an answer arrives will tell you how long that sentence has been waiting. An emperor wrote to himself because there was no one above him to tell him the truth. You may find, if you are honest, that your situation is closer to his than you assumed. The words you repeat in private become the walls you live inside. Chapter 2. Where the Boundary Falls. 2 families in a hill country once went to war over 11 paces of ground. Neither family could afford the lawsuit. Both had buried men over it. The dispute had begun 3 generations earlier with a wall that had been rebuilt after a landslide, and no one now living remembered where the original wall had stood, only that it had stood somewhere, and that the somewhere mattered more than the harvest, more than the children, more than sleep. A land surveyor was sent for. She arrived with a chain, a plumb line, and a set of records from the provincial archive, and she spent 4 days walking the slope while both families followed her, arguing. On the 5th day she drove a stone into the earth. "The boundary is here," she said. "It has always been here. It was here while you were fighting about it, and it will be here after you are gone. You have spent 3 generations at war over the location of something that never moved. What you were actually fighting was your own uncertainty." The elder of one family looked at the stone for a long time. "And if we do not accept it, then the stone stays where it is," the surveyor said, "and you keep bleeding on the wrong side of it." This is the first and largest instrument in the Stoic toolkit, and Marcus took it directly from Epictetus. who stated it with the bluntness of a man who had been someone else's property and had thought very carefully about what could and could not be owned. Some things answer to you, most do not. Your judgment answers to you, your effort answers to you. What you choose to pursue, what you refuse, how you interpret an event, the words you release into a room, these fall inside the boundary stone. Your body's health does not, past a point. Your reputation does not. The behavior of your children, the loyalty of your friends, the market, the diagnosis, the weather, the past, and the hour of your death all stand outside it, and no amount of anguish has ever moved that stone by the width of a hair. Notice what this teaching is not. It is not resignation, and it is not the counsel of a man who had nothing to lose. Marcus governed an empire in plague and war. He acted constantly, tirelessly, often against terrible odds. The dichotomy of control does not tell you to stop rowing, it tells you to stop rowing at the sky. The Taoist sages arrived at a neighboring insight from an entirely different direction. Their word for it is usually rendered as effortless action, the conduct of someone who has stopped fighting the grain of things and now works with it, the way water reaches the sea without ever forcing a channel. Water is not passive, water is relentless, but it never argues with the shape of the land, it uses the shape of the land, and the Buddha's line diagnosed the same wound in the language of craving. Suffering arises where the mind clamps onto what cannot be held, and releases where the clamp releases. 3 traditions, 3 vocabularies, 1 boundary stone. There is an old saying among country people that you cannot plow a field by turning it over in your mind. The folk wisdom is nearly the whole doctrine. So, the practice. It is crude on purpose, because subtle practices are the first ones abandoned. Tonight, take the one thing keeping you awake, the single situation your mind returns to at 2 in the morning. Write its name at the top of a page, then draw a line down the middle. On the left, list only what you can actually do something about, and be ruthless. I can call the office on Tuesday. I can tell him how I actually feel. I can stop rereading the message. On the right, list everything the situation contains that no action of yours will touch, whether he forgives me, whether the scan is clear, whether they think well of me when I am gone. Then read the right-hand column aloud, out loud, in your own voice, in an empty room. There is something about hearing it in air, rather than in thought, that makes the mind concede what it will not concede silently. Then act on exactly 1 item from the left column within 24 hours, not all of them. 1. Most people, doing this honestly for the first time, discover that the right-hand column is far longer than they believed, and that they have been spending the great majority of their strength there. That discovery is uncomfortable for an afternoon and liberating for a decade. The peace the Stoics described was never the peace of a life without storms. It was the peace of a man who had finally stopped grieving over the parts of the storm that were never his. Walk the ground, find the stone, then build on the side of it that belongs to you. Grief is what happens when we love something on the far side of the boundary and mistake our love for jurisdiction. Chapter 3. The space between the strike and the sound. Strike a bell, and the sound does not begin at once. There is a gap, small, almost immeasurable, but real, between the impact of the hammer and the arrival of the tone. Bell founders know this interval intimately. It is where the metal decides what it is going to say. You possess the same interval. Something strikes you, a look, a message, a tone of voice, a bill in the post, a word from a doctor, and then, a moment later, you sound, rage, or shame, or the cold drop in the stomach. To almost everyone, these feel like one event. The strike and the sound seem welded together, cause and effect, insult and injury. They are not welded. There is a gap. Everything the Stoics taught about inner peace lives inside that gap, and the whole discipline is nothing more than learning to feel it, then learning to stand in it, then learning to choose from inside it. A bell founder in a river town was known for refusing to sell more than half of what she cast. She would break the rejected bells apart and melt them again, and the townspeople thought her wasteful and a little mad. Her method was simple. When a casting had cooled, she struck it once with a small hammer, and then she did not listen to the first crash. She waited. She listened to what came after the noise, the tone that emerged when the shock had passed, and only the metal's true voice remained. Some bells crashed magnificently and then went sour. Some sounded dull at the strike and opened afterward into something clean. An apprentice once asked her how long she waited. "As long as it takes," she said, "to stop hearing the hammer and start hearing the bell." She said the same thing to the townspeople who came to her furious about a neighbor, a debt, an insult in the market. She rarely gave advice. She would simply hand them a cup of water and say nothing until they had finished it, and by the end of the cup, most of them were describing a smaller problem than the one they had arrived with. The Buddhist tradition maps this territory with unusual precision through the teaching of the two arrows. The first arrow is the event itself, the loss, the pain, the sharp fact of what happened. The second arrow is the one you fire into yourself afterward, the story, the replay, the outrage, the interpretation, the 12 hours of imagined conversation. The first arrow is often unavoidable. The second is manufactured entirely on the premises. The Stoics named the same mechanism in their own dry technical language. An impression arrives. Before it can become an emotion, some part of you must assent to it, must sign the document, must agree that yes, this is an insult, yes, this is a catastrophe, yes, this means what it appears to mean. Withhold the signature and the impression remains merely a visitor at the door. Marcus returns to this repeatedly in the notebooks, in the tone of a man correcting himself yet again. Remove the judgment, and the harm goes with it. What remains is an event, and events are survivable. It is the verdict attached to the event that does the damage. The Hermetic teachers of Alexandria pushed the claim further than either. Their first principle held that the universe itself is mental in nature, that what we call reality is worked and reworked in mind before it appears in matter. You need not accept the whole cosmology to feel the practical edge of it. If mind is the medium, then the interval between strike and sound is the only place where anything is genuinely being decided. So here is the practice, and it takes 4 seconds. The next time you feel the strike, the flare of heat behind the face, the drop in the chest, say silently, in plain words, "This is an impression." Then take 1 full breath, in and out, before you speak, type, or move. That is all, not a technique for suppressing feeling. You will feel it fully. It is a technique for refusing to sign the document at the speed the document demands. Do it once today, and you will notice something unsettling. In a great many cases, the sentence you would have said in second 1 is not the sentence you want to say in second 4. The intervening breath costs you nothing and saves you, over a lifetime, an amount of ruin that cannot be calculated. For the harder cases, the ones that arrive at night, the ones already decades old, the same interval applies, only stretched. Wait until morning before answering. Delay the letter 1 day. The Stoics were not opposed to strong action. They were opposed to action taken by a mind that had been struck and had not yet stopped ringing. The metal always tells the truth eventually. The question is only whether you are still listening when it does. You are not obliged to become the first sound you make. Chapter 4. The ferryman does not argue with the river. There is a kind of strength that consists entirely of knowing what not to push against. Most of us were raised on the opposite instruction. We were taught that character means force, that the admirable life is the one spent shouldering into the wind, refusing circumstance, bending the world by insistence, and there is truth in that teaching. Marcus himself was among the most relentlessly dutiful men who ever lived. He did not withdraw from the world. He governed it while sick, while grieving, while betrayed. But he governed it the way a good ferryman crosses water, not by defeating the current, but by reading it. On a wide crossing where 2 provinces met, a ferryman worked the same stretch of water for 40 years. In spring the melt came down hard, and the current ran fast and brown. In late summer the channel dropped and shifted, and sandbars surfaced where deep water had been in April. In winter the whole thing turned slow and black and cold enough to kill a man in minutes. A younger boatman set up in competition downstream. He was stronger, and he had a better boat, and he announced that he would make the crossing in a straight line, the shortest distance, the fastest passage, no wasted stroke. For a season he was faster. Then the spring melt came and took him sideways into the pilings, and he lost the boat and nearly lost his passengers, and he came to the old ferryman to ask what he had done wrong. "Nothing," the old man said. "You rode exactly where you wanted to go. Isn't that the point? The point is the far bank." He pointed upstream, at an angle that seemed absurd, aimed at nothing. "I begin there, every time. The water carries me down as I cross, and I arrive at the landing. I have never once rowed toward the landing in my life, and I have never once failed to reach it." The younger man looked at the water. "So you give in to it?" "I use it," said the ferryman. "Giving in would be letting it take me. Fighting it would be letting it break me. There is a third thing, and it takes 40 years to learn, and it looks from the shore like doing very little." The Taoist sages named this third thing long before Rome existed as an idea. Their term is usually translated as effortless action. Though the translation misleads, it is not the absence of effort but the absence of friction. The sage in those texts is compared to water precisely because water is both yielding and irresistible, because it never contends, and therefore is never defeated. To act in accordance with the grain of a situation is to spend a fraction of the energy and arrive earlier. The Stoics reached the same shore by a colder road. Seneca, writing letters to a friend in his own final years, put it in an image the Romans would have understood physically. Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling. The destination in his picture is fixed either way. Willingness does not change the route. It changes whether you arrive upright. And in the Upanishads there is a stranger consolation still, the teaching that the self which watches the crossing is not the body being carried, that behind the changing water and the changing weather and the changing face in the polished bronze, there is something that does not move. A man who half suspects this is harder to frighten. He has less to defend. Here is where this becomes usable. This week, take one obstacle already on your calendar, not a hypothetical, something scheduled, the difficult appointment, the conversation with your brother, the paperwork, the treatment, the thing you have been dreading in a low background hum for days. Then say this sentence about it, deliberately. This also is part of the crossing. Not this is fine, not this is secretly good. Those are lies, and your mind will reject them instantly and rightly. The reframe is narrower and therefore survivable. The obstacle is not an interruption of your journey. It is the terrain the journey happens to be made of. The current is not opposing the crossing. The current is the crossing. Marcus put this in a form so compact it has outlived its context by 18 centuries. What stands in the way becomes the way. What blocks the road is the road. The rock in the channel does not stop the water. It teaches the water where to go, and the water goes there, and the sea receives it anyway. Say the sentence before the appointment. Say it in the waiting room. Say it in the car afterward. Then, having said it, do the thing. What are you currently rowing straight at, and how long have you been losing ground to it? There is an angle, upstream and to the left, that looks like surrender from the bank, and is in fact the only path anyone has ever taken to the far side. The water was never your enemy. It was only your route, wearing a face you did not like. Chapter 5. Rehearsing the loss. Everything you love will be taken from you. The only question the traditions ever disagreed about is what to do with that fact in the meantime. Most of the modern world's answer is avoidance. Do not speak of it. Do not look at it directly. Arrange the furniture of your life so that the subject never enters the room, and this produces exactly the outcome you would expect. A population unable to discuss death, unpracticed at loss, and therefore struck flat when it comes, as though something unprecedented had happened, as though the terms had been changed without notice. The writer of Ecclesiastes takes the opposite approach, and takes it early. Everything is vapor, he says, breath, mist, the thing you cannot close your hand around. He surveys his houses and his vineyards and his accumulated wisdom, and concludes that all of it passes and none of it is owned. And then, having established this, he does something that startles every reader who expected despair. He tells you to eat your bread, to drink your wine with a glad heart, to love the companion of your life, and to do your work with your whole strength. The vapor is not an argument for withdrawal. It is the reason the bread tastes like anything at all. A potter in a market town kept a strange discipline. Each morning before opening her workshop, she threw a single small cup, quickly, competently, nothing special, and when it had dried enough to hold its shape, she pressed it flat between her hands and returned the clay to the barrel. Her daughter, who had learned the trade beside her, found this unbearable. You could sell it, or give it away. Why make something only to destroy it? Because I sell 40 cups a week, the potter said, and every one of them will break. Some in a year, some in 50. Not one of them will outlast the world. If I do not practice losing them, I will begin to believe that I am making permanent things, and then I will make them worse. Worse how? Carefully. She scraped the wheel clean. Fear makes thin walls and timid handles. The potter who thinks nothing breaks has no reason to make anything beautiful. Beauty is what you give a thing, precisely because it is passing. She dropped the flattened clay into the barrel, where it would become tomorrow's cup. Also, when a customer drops one in the street and weeps, I know what to say to her, because I have already done it that morning. The Stoics built a formal exercise out of this, and they were unembarrassed by how grim it sounds from outside. The premeditation of adversity, a deliberate, brief, unflinching rehearsal of what could be lost. Marcus practiced it constantly in the notebooks, sometimes brutally, reminding himself as he kissed his child good-night that the child was mortal, that this was not a morbid thought but a true one, and that a truth held in advance does less violence than a truth that arrives by ambush. This is widely misunderstood as a recipe for gloom. In practice it does the reverse. The mind that has already looked at the loss stops flinching away from the thing it loves. You cannot fully embrace what you are half braced against. The Egyptian mystery schools ritualized the same confrontation on a civilizational scale. Their entire funerary architecture, the weighing of the heart, the long preparation, the texts written to be read by the dead, amounts to a culture that rehearsed its own ending in enormous detail, and it produced not a morbid people, but one of the most vigorously world-affirming cultures in the human record. There is an old saying among fishing families that the man who has made peace with the sea sleeps best on the water. The peace is not achieved by pretending the sea is safe. So the practice, and it should take 3 minutes. Tomorrow at dawn, before the day gets its hands on you, sit still and bring to mind one thing you love and expect to keep: a person, your health, the house, your own competent, reliable mind. Then imagine, plainly and without drama, that it is gone. Do not construct a story or a deathbed scene. Just hold the plain fact of the absence for perhaps 90 seconds. It will hurt. Let it. Then open your eyes and greet the thing as if it had just been returned to you. That second movement is the whole exercise, and most people skip it. The rehearsal without the greeting is only anxiety. The rehearsal with the greeting is gratitude manufactured on purpose, at will, without waiting for circumstance to produce it. If you are already living inside a loss, if the greeting is no longer available for the one you would have chosen, the exercise still works, and it works better than almost anything else. Choose what remains. Greet that. Why does the second cup of water in a drought taste different from the 100th in an ordinary week? Nothing changed in the water. Hold everything the way you would hold a warm cup on a cold morning, completely, and with the knowledge that you will set it down. Chapter 6. The Morning Muster. Before the sun clears the eastern wall, Someone has already walked it. The first entry of the second notebook is the most famous thing Marcus ever wrote to himself, and it is essentially a briefing delivered before getting out of bed. Say to yourself at daybreak, "Today I will meet the meddler, the ingrate, the arrogant, the deceitful, the envious, the unneighborly. They are this way because they cannot tell good from bad. They are, nevertheless, my kin, not by blood but by mind. By the shared portion of reason we were all issued. Therefore none of them can truly harm me, and I cannot be angry at them, because we were made for cooperation, the way two hands or two rows of teeth were." Read that as poetry, and it is beautiful. Read it as an operational order, and it becomes useful. He is doing something quite specific there. He is loading the day's difficulties into his mind before they arrive, while he is calm and rested and has full command of himself, because he knows perfectly well that at the third hour, when the ungrateful official is actually standing in front of him, he will not have full command of himself. Peace is not established in the moment of provocation. Peace is provisioned beforehand, like water carried up to a wall. A centurion on a frontier garrison had a habit his men found eccentric. He rose before the watch changed, and walked the full circuit of the wall alone in the dark, not inspecting for enemies, which is what everyone assumed, but stopping at intervals, looking at nothing, and moving on. A young Opsho finally asked him what he was looking for out there. "Not looking," the centurion said, "deciding." "Deciding what?" "There are 80 men behind that gate. Before it opens, I decide who I am going to be to each of them. Vetus will be drunk again, and will lie about it. Crispus will do half the work and claim all of it. The quartermaster will find a reason the boots have not come. All of that is already true. It is true right now, while they are asleep." He looked out at the gray line where the sky was starting. "If I meet those men without having met them first, they will decide who I am. I would rather do it myself, out here, where it is quiet." "And if you decide wrong, then I walk the wall again tomorrow," he said. "It is a circuit. That is why I chose it." The Hermetic tradition would recognize the structure of what the centurion is doing, though it would use grander language. Their governing axiom holds that the pattern above is repeated below, that the small is shaped in the image of the large, that inner order and outer order are not two facts but one fact seen from two positions. On that view, the man who arranges his own mind before dawn is not preparing for the world, he is beginning it. The wall is walked inside first and outside second. The Buddhist teachers built a formal practice on the same ground, and theirs is the more tender version. In the cultivation of loving kindness, the practitioner deliberately extends goodwill outward in rings, to oneself, to the beloved, to the neutral stranger, and finally, this is the hard ring, the one that takes years, to the difficult person, the one who wronged you, the one whose name still produces heat. The point is not to approve of them. The point is that carrying hostility is a labor you perform on yourself, and the person you resent does not lift any part of the weight. Marcus arrives at a colder version of the same mercy. They act badly because they are mistaken about what is good, and being mistaken is a misfortune rather than a crime. You do not rage at a man for being colorblind. You simply stop handing him the red thread. The practice is short, and it belongs to the first 90 seconds of your day, before your feet touch the floor. Name the 3 people most likely to test you today. Say each name silently. Then give each one a single prepared sentence, not a plan for defeating them, a stance for meeting them. He will interrupt me, and I will let him finish, and then continue where I stopped. She will not thank me, and I did not do it for the thanks. He will be afraid, and his fear will sound like anger, and I will answer the fear. 3 names, 3 sentences, 90 seconds, then get up. You will not be perfect at it. You will fail with the second person before noon on some days. Walk the wall again tomorrow. It is a circuit. That is the entire design. The empire's most powerful man began each day by admitting he was about to be annoyed. That admission, made early enough, is most of what serenity actually consists of. Provision your peace before dawn, because no one has ever built a wall while the raid was in progress. Chapter 7. The Physician's Plain Naming. Half of what you call suffering is description, not the event. The description of the event, the adjectives, the verdict, the small editorial that attaches itself so quickly to a fact that you never see the two arrive separately. A man is passed over for a position, that is the fact. Within 4 seconds it has become, they have always looked down on me. I have wasted 11 years here. I am the sort of person this happens to. None of that was in the fact. All of it will be in the sleeplessness. Marcus performed a specific operation on this in the notebooks, over and over. With the patience of someone dressing a wound that keeps reopening, he would take the thing troubling him and strip it back to its bare physical description. Fine food becomes the corpse of an animal. Purple robes become wool dyed with the secretion of a shellfish. Applause becomes air moved by tongues. It reads as cynicism to a first-time reader, and it is nothing of the kind. He was not degrading the world. He was removing the coat of paint that his own mind had applied without asking him, so that he could see the actual dimensions of the thing. There was a physician in a port city who forbade his students the use of adjectives. They found the rule absurd. How was one to describe a case without saying the fever was raging, the wound terrible, the prognosis grim? He held to it anyway. In his examination room, a student who said a horrifying infection of the leg was made to say it again. Swelling from the ankle to the knee, heat to the touch, red streaking upward, 4 days. One of them accused him of coldness. A woman was dying in the next room, and he had made her son describe it in inventory. When you said horrifying, the physician replied, "What did you do next?" The student was silent. You did nothing next. There is nothing to do next with horrifying. It is a door with no handle. He set down his instruments. When you said red streaking upward 4 days, your hands moved before I spoke. You already knew. The plain words told you where to put your hands. The terrible word only told you how to feel, and feeling is not a treatment. Then he added, more quietly, because he was not a cold man, I do not forbid you grief. I forbid you grief that arrives before the facts and dresses them. Grieve afterward. Grieve as long as you need. But first, look at the leg. The Upanishads carry the oldest and most radical version of this stripping away. Their method is negation. Not this, applied not to a wound, but to the self. You are asked to name each thing you take yourself to be, and then set it down. Not the body, which changes, not the breath, not the emotions passing across you like weather over a field, not even the mind that observes them. The practice removes description after description, and what the sages claim remains at the end is not an emptiness but a witness, the awareness in which all of it has been occurring, unharmed by any of it, present at every disaster of your life and injured by none. You need not accept the metaphysics to use the tool. The tool is this. Whatever you can describe, you are standing slightly outside of. The describer is never fully inside the description. The Sufi poets applied the same subtraction to the ego rather than the intellect, calling for the polishing away of everything the self has accumulated in order to arrive at what was underneath. Their word for the accumulated layer translates poorly, but the image is of soot on glass. The light was never diminished, the glass was. And here is the point where all of this becomes practical, so take it exactly as written. Choose the situation currently costing you the most sleep. Write it down twice. The first time, write it however it lives in you, full, wounded, unedited, with every adjective and every accusation and every prediction. Let it be as long as it wants, then set that page aside. On the second page, write the same situation with every adjective, every motive you have assigned to another person, and every statement about the future removed. Only what a stranger with no stake could have observed. He did not return the call. 3 weeks. The account balance is this number. The scan is scheduled for the 9th. Then read them side by side. The second page is the situation. The first page is the situation plus your entire inheritance of fear, and it is the first page you have been living in, and it is the first page that has been waking you at 3 in the morning. Most of what you have been carrying was never delivered to you by the world. You wrote it yourself, in your own hand, and then read it back and believed it was news. Nothing enters the citadel unless you carry it in. The second page, by the way, almost always contains a next action. That is the strangest and most reliable effect of the exercise. The plain description tells you where to put your hands. Look at the leg. The word you attached to it was never part of the illness. Chapter 8. The View from the Ridge. There is a cure for humiliation that costs nothing and takes 60 seconds, and almost no one uses it, because it requires briefly agreeing to be small. Marcus used it constantly. Scattered through the notebooks are passages where he deliberately lifts his vantage, rising above the palace, above the province, above the whole administered world, until the empire is a smudge, and the armies are ants moving grain, and the man who insulted him at the morning audience has vanished entirely into the general blur of human activity. Then he descends again and goes back to work. The Stoics called it the view from above, and it was not escapism. It was recalibration. A grievance held at arm's length has one size. The same grievance held against the sky has another, and the second size is the true one. A cartographer spent her working life drawing a coastline she had never walked. She worked from the reports of sailors, from soundings, from the sketches of men who had rowed into every bay, and her maps were the finest in the trade, used by captains who trusted them with their hulls. But she had never once stood on that shore. Late in her life, a young clerk who admired her asked whether she regretted it, all those years drawing a country she had never entered. "I went once," she said, "when I was young. I walked 4 days of it, and it was the worst map I ever made." She laughed at herself. On the ground every cove is enormous, every headland takes a day. I came back and drew a coast where the 4 days I had walked took up half the sheet and the other 300 miles were crammed into the corner. A captain nearly went aground on my affection for a beach. She tapped the chart in front of her. "Down there, the thing you are standing in front of is the whole world. From up here, it is a notch 2 fingers wide, and the sea beyond it is very large, and the ship gets home." Both are true, but only one of them is useful for steering. The Sufi mystics of the road made this ascent the center of their poetry, rather than their method. The whole of a human life, in that literature, is a caravan passing through a country it does not own, and the traveler who forgets this begins to fight over lodging as though lodging were home. There is a bitterness available only to people who have mistaken the inn for the destination. Their remedy was to keep the scale of the journey in view, to remember the road behind and the road ahead while standing in the disappointing room. The Taoist sages arrived by a different path at the same proportions. In their writings, a great bird rises until mountains become texture and rivers become thread, and the small creatures below argue that such a flight is pointless because everything worth reaching is within a short hop. The text does not insult the small creatures. It simply notes that they are describing the size of the world from the size of their wings, and the Stoics, more austere than either, folded time into the same picture. Marcus reminds himself that whole nations have already passed, courts, dynasties, celebrated names now unpronounceable, and that the thing consuming him today will be, within a few generations, not even a rumor. There is an old saying among mountain people that no argument survives the walk up. The air thins, and the grievance thins with it. Now, the practice, and it is meant for a specific moment. Before any conversation you are dreading, the difficult call, the appointment, the family meal where the old wound will be reopened, stand up, not sitting. Standing matters more than it should. Then take 60 seconds and pull the camera back deliberately, in stages, this room, the building, the street with all its lit windows and every person behind them carrying something. the city at night from a great height, the curve of the coast, the dark side of the world turning slowly toward morning, the whole of it hanging in a silence that has been going on for a very long time and will continue, then come back down, all the way, to your own 2 feet on the floor and the door in front of you, and walk through it. The purpose is not to conclude that nothing matters. That conclusion is the counterfeit version of this exercise, and it produces paralysis, not peace. The purpose is to restore the true proportion between your dignity and the situation, because in almost every case you are larger than the thing you are afraid of, and you had temporarily forgotten. What, exactly, would still be troubling you if you could see your whole life laid out at once, the way the cartographer saw her coast? Whatever survives that question deserves your full attention. Everything else has just been handed back to you, along with the hours you were going to spend on it. Rise until it is the right size, then return and do what needs doing. Chapter 9. The thread you happen to be holding. You will never see the whole of it. This is not a failure of your attention. One of the quiet consolations running underneath the Stoic system is a claim that sounds abstract until the night you need it, that nothing in the universe is a separate piece. They called it the sympathy of all things, the conviction that reality is a single organism, that every event is stitched into every other, and that your own life is not a small isolated struggle, but a working part of an enormous and coherent motion. Marcus returns to this whenever the notebooks turn bleak. He reminds himself that he is a limb of a body, and that a limb which cuts itself off from the body does not become free, it becomes a piece of meat. Withdrawal from the common work, in his view, was not a philosophical achievement. It was an amputation performed on oneself. A weaver in a workshop of 40 looms spent 9 years on a single commission she never saw. The tapestry was enormous, a hunting scene, ordered for a hall she would never enter, and it was woven in sections on separate frames, from the reverse, in a room where no one was permitted to assemble the panels. Her own portion was roughly the size of a door. For 9 years she worked a field of greens and browns, with a strange pale curve running through the corner of it, and she had no idea what the curve was. She asked the master weaver once. He would not say. He said that weavers who knew the picture began improving it. In her 9th year the tapestry was hung, and she was permitted, with the others, to stand in the hall and look at it. She found her section immediately. Anyone would find their own 9 years. And the pale curve in the corner of it turned out to be the underside of a hound's jaw, the leading edge of the whole composition, the thing the eye went to first. She had woven the most important line in the tapestry without knowing she was doing it. She had woven it well, not because she understood it, but because she had held the tension even, day after day, in a corner of a room, on work she assumed was background. Afterward the master weaver said the only tender thing anyone remembered him saying, "You have all now seen the picture once. Tomorrow you will go back to your frames and see nothing again. That is the trade. The hall is not where the tapestry is made." The Kabbalists gave this structure a cosmology of extraordinary daring. In their telling, the vessels of the original creation shattered, and sparks of the divine light scattered into every corner of the world, and lodged in ordinary things, in food, in labor, in strangers, in the tedium of a Tuesday. The repair of the world, in that system, is not accomplished by great acts performed by great figures. It is accomplished by countless small liftings, each one raising a single spark, none of them able to see the others. No one in that scheme is a spectator, and no one is given the overview. The Buddhist teachers describe the same interwovenness without the mysticism, through dependent origination. Nothing arises alone. Everything leans on everything, and the sense of being a sealed and separate self is precisely the misperception that generates the suffering. Pull one thread, and the cloth moves everywhere. 3 traditions, 1 instruction. You are working a corner. The corner is real work. Here is what to do with it this week, and it is deliberately small. Perform 1 act of unrequested usefulness, and tell no one you did it. not a favor asked for, not a duty owed. Something no one will trace back to you. The neighbor's bin brought in, the difficult letter written on someone else's behalf, money left with a person who will never know the source, the mess in the shared space cleaned before the person responsible returns and is embarrassed by it. Then say nothing. Resist the small tug to mention it. That tug is the part of you that wants payment, and payment collapses the exercise into a transaction. Do this once and watch what happens inside you within the hour. There is a specific quality of steadiness that follows an act performed for the fabric rather than for the ledger, and it cannot be produced by any amount of self-care, because it is not about the self at all. Marcus noticed it too. He wrote to himself that the vine does not demand recognition for producing grapes. Having borne fruit once, it simply goes on to the next season. The healthy thing does the next good act the way it did the last one, without a bill attached. What is the tension you are keeping even, in your corner, that you have assumed is background? Grief, loneliness, and the sense of not mattering all share one root, the conviction that you have been cut out of the pattern. You have not. You are working it from the reverse side, which is the only side anyone works from. Hold your thread evenly. The picture is not your assignment. Chapter 10. The Innkeeper's Guests. Nothing in your life belongs to you. Everything in it has been lent. Epictetus, the former slave whose recorded talks turned the young Marcus toward philosophy, taught this with a plainness that still stings. Never say that you have lost anything, he said. Say that you have given it back. The child, the friend, the house, the strength in your hands. You did not manufacture any of it. You did not set the term of the loan, and when it is recalled, your only real choice is the manner of the returning. To a modern ear this can sound cruel. It is not cruel. It is the difference between being robbed and reaching the end of a lease, and though the room empties either way, the two experiences produce entirely different men. An innkeeper on a pilgrim road kept 11 rooms. In his first years the work destroyed him. He was a warm man, and he loved his guests, and every dawn they went on down the road, and he stood in the yard afterward, feeling as though something had been taken. He learned their children's names. He kept their favorite cups. He grieved every departure, 11 at a time, for years, until his wife told him plainly that he was going to die of a job that consisted entirely of people leaving. He changed nothing about how he treated them. He changed one thing about how he understood the road. They are not leaving, he decided. They are arriving. I am simply not at the place they are arriving at. After that he ran the finest inn on the road for 30 years. He still learned the children's names. He still kept the cups. But he began to stand in the yard at dawn, with something other than loss in his chest, because he had stopped experiencing himself as the destination. Near the end of his life, a young man who had inherited an inn further north came to ask him the secret, expecting something about linen or accounts. "Every guest is already gone," the old innkeeper said. "They were gone when they arrived. That is what a guest is. Once you know it, you stop spending the evening bracing for the morning. He poured for them both, and then you are actually with them, which is the only thing they came for anyway." Ecclesiastes reaches the same clearing from its long survey of vapor and wind. Everything is on loan. Nothing is retained. The river of generations goes on emptying into a sea that never fills, and the counsel that emerges from all that unsparing accounting is not withdrawal but presence. Eat the bread, do the work, be with the one you love, in the days that were given, which are the only currency there is. The Sufi tradition made hospitality itself the master image of the spiritual life. The heart in that poetry is a guest house, and everything that arrives, grief, delight, shame, a sudden joy with no cause, the meanness that surprises you in yourself, arrives as a traveler at the door. The teaching is not to sort them into welcome and unwelcome. It is to receive each one, to give it the room it came for, and to let it go on down the road when it is finished, because the guests you refuse to admit are the ones who camp outside the walls and never leave. Marcus, who buried several children and outlived most of his friends, wrote about this without ever once permitting himself self-pity. His discipline was to remember that the loan had always been a loan, that the terms had been posted from the beginning, and that gratitude for the years given is a more accurate response than outrage at the years withheld. The practice for this week is a single word, and it is harder than it looks. For 7 days, whenever you would say or think lost, replace it with returned, out loud where you can, silently where you cannot. I have not lost my mother, she has been returned. I have not lost my career of 30 years, it has been returned. I have not lost my hearing, my house, the version of my body that could climb stairs without stopping. All of it has been returned. The first day you will hate this. It will feel like a trick, a piece of wordplay laid over a real wound, and you may resent the suggestion. Continue anyway. By the 4th or 5th day something shifts, and it is not denial, and it is not acceptance in the passive sense. It is the recovery of the years themselves. Lost rewrites the whole past as a theft, and a theft has no good hours in it. Returned leaves the years standing where they were, intact, yours, real, finished, and lets you have them again, which is the only having that was ever on offer. The room does empty. Every room does. The question this chapter puts to you is whether you spend the evening with your guests or spend it watching the door. What was given for a while was given. The giving is not undone by the ending. Chapter 11. The pruning knife. Ask of any hour in your week, is this necessary? Most of them will not survive the question. Seneca, writing to a younger friend from the far end of a long and complicated life, made an accusation that has never stopped being true. People guard their money furiously and give away their days for nothing. They will litigate over a boundary and hand whole afternoons to anyone who asks. And at the end they complain that life was short, when in fact life was ample, and they simply spent it in scattered handfuls on things no one required of them. Marcus took up the same knife in the notebooks, and he used a phrase that ought to be carried in the pocket. Do the necessary. Say the necessary. And then he adds the part everyone forgets. You will find, in doing this, that most of what you say and do is not necessary at all, and that removing it gives you back not only the time, but the tranquility, because a great deal of agitation is simply the residue of unnecessary activity. Peace, in this reading, is not something you acquire. It is what appears when you stop generating the alternative. An orchard keeper in a hill valley was the only man in the district paid by the tree rather than the basket. His neighbors thought this madness. They grew everything they could and pruned as little as possible, and their trees were magnificent, great tangled crowns, dense with wood, bristling with growth. Every branch was potential. Every shoot might bear. His own trees looked, by comparison, savaged. Each winter he went through the rows with a curved knife and took out a third of what was there. Water shoots, crossing limbs, the inward growth that would shade the center, the second leader competing with the first. Whole healthy branches, alive and green, cut and dropped on the frozen ground. A neighbor came to him one spring, in the year the crops were compared, and could not understand the difference. The neighbor's trees had produced an enormous quantity of small hard fruit that no merchant would buy. The orchard keepers had produced less by count and 3 times the value. You cut off half your harvest, the neighbor said. I cut off half my demands, the orchard keeper said. The tree has a fixed strength. It does not know that. It will try to feed everything you leave on it, every shoot, every sucker, every branch growing back into the middle where no light reaches, and it will feed all of them equally badly. He turned a low limb over in his hand, looking at the buds. The knife is not violence. The knife is the only way I have of telling the tree what matters. He let the branch go. I am not a grower. Anyone can grow. I am paid to decide. The Zen tradition arrived at the same aesthetic and made a civilization out of it. The empty room with 1 scroll, the garden of gravel and 5 stones. the bowl valued precisely for what has been left out of it. That sensibility is often mistaken abroad for a taste in decoration. It is actually a claim about attention. A room containing one object allows you to see one object. A room containing 40 allows you to see nothing, and this is the part that matters for peace. It quietly requires a small piece of your mind to maintain each of the 40. The Hermetic teachers, working the same principle from the top down, held that order in the greater world and order in the individual are one order expressed at two scales. Clutter, on that view, is never merely physical. A crowded life produces a crowded mind, which produces crowded judgment, which produces the frantic quality that so many people mistake for a full existence. There is an old saying among vine dressers that the best fruit grows on the branch you almost cut. The saying is usually taken as a warning against pruning. It is the opposite. It means the tree only concentrates when it has been told to. So here is the week's work, and it will be uncomfortable in a useful way. Take one recurring commitment, something that repeats weekly or monthly, and that you have never once evaluated because it simply arrived in your life and stayed. A standing obligation, a membership, a conversation you dread and attend anyway. A responsibility you assumed in a season that has ended. Ask the plain question, is this necessary? Not is it pleasant? Not would someone be mildly disappointed? Necessary. Then cut exactly one thing before the week is out. One. Not a purge. Purges are another form of frenzy, and they reverse within a month. One branch, chosen deliberately, removed cleanly, and the ground left bare where it was. Notice what the strength does when it stops being divided. That noticing is what will convince you, far more than any argument here, that most of your exhaustion was never the weight of your life. It was the number of directions your life was being asked to grow in at once. The knife in the orchard is not subtraction. It is the instruction to concentrate.
Mankind.
Chapter 12. The weight in the hull. An empty ship handles worst of all. This surprises people who have never sailed. It seems obvious that a vessel carrying nothing should be nimble, less to drag, less to slow it, less to sink. In fact, an unloaded hull rides high and skittish, catches every gust broadside, rolls sickeningly in a moderate sea, and in a real blow will go over. What steadies a ship is weight placed low and deliberately, ballast, and a keel that runs deep into water it cannot see. The heaviest thing a human being can carry is the certain knowledge of their own death, and it is the only thing that has ever reliably held anyone steady. Marcus wrote to himself about this constantly, not as morbidity, but as ballast. You could leave life at this moment, he tells himself. Let that determine what you do and say. He was not trying to frighten himself. He was trying to load the hull. A shipwright in a harbor town was known for a practice her customers hated to pay for. When a hull came off the stocks, before a single cargo was booked, she had stone carried down and laid into the bottom of the empty hold, heavy, useless, unprofitable stone, occupying space that could have held goods. Owners argued with her every time. They were paying for a merchant vessel and receiving, they said, a barge full of rocks. She had a standard answer, and she gave it in front of the boat. You will fill this hold with grain in the spring, and it will handle beautifully, and you will thank me for nothing. Then in the autumn you will run empty back from the northern ports, in the season of the worst weather, with nothing in the hold at all. And that is the crossing that will kill you. She would knock her knuckle against the planking. A ship is not tested when it is full. Any fool can carry cargo. A ship is tested on the empty return, and what saves it then is the weight nobody wanted to buy. One owner, more thoughtful than most, asked whether there was not some way to make the stone unnecessary. There is, she said. Never go out. That is the only hull I know of that needs no ballast, and I have never built one, and neither has anyone else worth hiring. The Egyptian mystery schools organized an entire civilization around this weight, and did it without gloom. Their preparation for death was elaborate, lifelong, textual, architectural, and the culture that produced it was not a culture of despair, but one of ferocious appetite for building, feasting, record-keeping, and beauty. Their central image at the threshold was a scale, the heart set against a feather, and the whole ethical life understood as the daily business of not accumulating weight of the wrong kind. The Taoist sages, who wrote about death more casually than almost anyone, treated it as one more turn of a process that had been turning long before you and would continue after, a change of form, the material returning to the material. Their teachers are shown laughing at deathbeds, not from callousness, but because they had genuinely stopped experiencing the ending as an outrage, and the peace of a man who has stopped taking his own mortality personally is not a small peace. And Marcus, who watched a plague empty his provinces, and who buried more of his own children than he raised, wrote what may be the most useful sentence on this subject anyone has produced. No one loses any life other than the one they are living now, and no one lives any life other than the one they are losing. The past is already gone and cannot be taken from you. The future was never in your possession. What death removes is the present hour, and if that is the only thing at risk, then the only rational response is to be actually present in it, which is precisely what the fear of death prevents. The practice for this belongs to the last minutes before sleep, in the dark, with the lights already out. It is the Stoic evening review, and both Seneca and Marcus kept some version of it. 3 questions, asked in order, without self-punishment. What did I do badly today? Name it plainly, in the physician's language from earlier, the actual behavior, not a verdict on your character. What did I do well? You must answer this one too. A review that only collects faults is not philosophy, it is corrosion, and it will be abandoned within a week. And what is still undone that I am able to do tomorrow? Then close the day, deliberately. Say to yourself that it is finished, because it is, and no amount of night thinking has ever amended a completed day. People expect this to make sleep harder. It does the opposite, reliably, and the reason is simple. The mind revisits the day at 3 in the morning because the day was never reviewed and never closed. Give it the audit it is demanding, in a form it can accept, and it stops demanding it. Load the stone low, then go out into the weather, which is where the ship was always going. A life becomes steady at the exact moment it stops pretending it is permanent. Chapter 13. The Last Watch. Every observation ends the same way, not with an answer, but with the sky getting light. We come now to the final turning of the notebook, and to a question the whole tradition was built to answer, not how to avoid the ending. There is no method for that and never has been, and every philosophy that has promised one has been a consolation rather than a practice. The question is narrower and far more useful. What does a person actually do in the last stretch, when the outcome is no longer in doubt? Marcus wrote his final notebooks as a sick man in a military camp, in his late 50s, on a frontier campaign he would not return from. He knew. The tone of those last pages is unmistakable to anyone who has sat with someone in that condition, a man putting his instruments away in order, still working, no longer expecting relief. An astronomer in a hill observatory spent her last working year tracking a single star. It was not an important star. It had been catalogued by someone else, given a number, and left alone. But she had noticed an irregularity in its rising some decades earlier, and she had decided that before her eyes failed entirely, she would follow its whole arc across one season. Every night it was visible, the same instrument, the same careful marks in the same book. Her assistant, who loved her and who could see how the work was costing her, asked one night what the observation was for, who would use it, what it would prove. Nothing, probably, she said. She was making a mark. There is a young man in the Southern Academy who will be able to compare my numbers with his own in about 30 years. He may find something, he may not. He does not know I exist, and I will not know what he finds. Then why finish it? She looked up from the eyepiece. "Because it is my watch." Near dawn, when the sky whitened and the star washed out and the observation was over, she did what she did every morning. She closed the shutter, capped the instrument, wrote the date, and went down to sleep. She did it the same way on her last night as on her first, and she did not treat the final entry differently from the others, and this was understood by everyone who worked with her to have been the actual teaching, offered without a single word of instruction. The Upanishads speak to what the astronomer had quietly stopped worrying about. Behind the observer and the observation, behind the changing instrument and the failing eye, those texts place something that does not participate in the change, the awareness in which a life occurs, uninjured by any of its contents, as unaffected by the ending as the sky is by the setting of one star. Whether you receive this as metaphysics or as metaphor, it does the same work. It loosens the grip of the assumption that you are identical to the arc you are currently tracing. The Sufi poets, who wrote more about departure than any other tradition, treated the ending as a return rather than a rupture, the reed cut from the reed bed, crying its whole life in the music it makes, finally going back to the water it was cut from. There is an old saying among people who work at sea that no one has ever been lost on the way home. The comfort in that phrase is not that the sea is safe, it is that the direction was never in question. And the Buddhist teachers, most practical of all on this point, ask only that you notice how much of your suffering right now is the effort of holding a shape that was always going to disperse. Set the effort down, and the shape disperses anyway, but you get the remaining hours back. Which brings us to what Marcus actually did with this knowledge, because he did something specific with it, and it is the most concrete instruction in the entire book. He did the next thing. He held the audience, signed the order, endured the ungrateful official, kept the watch. He did not spend his final campaign composing final thoughts about final things. He wrote a few lines to himself at night, and then went back to the work of the morning, which was ordinary and thankless and his. Your practice, then, the last of the 13, is the simplest and the hardest. Name the role you were actually given, not the one you wanted, or the one you would have chosen at 25, or the one you feel you were cheated of. The actual one, as it stands today, the person who cares for someone who no longer recognizes them, the one who holds a family together with phone calls, the one whose whole assignment this year is to be patient with a failing body, the one who is simply here, in a quiet room, listening to a voice in the dark. Name it in one plain sentence, then do the next hour of it well, not the next year. You do not have to be equal to the next year tonight. The next hour, done well, is the entire method, and it is the only unit of time anyone has ever actually been given. The shutter closes at dawn either way. What the astronomer knew, what the emperor was still teaching himself, in Greek, by lamplight, at the end of the last notebook, is that the closing is not the failure of the watch, it is the completion of it. Keep the watch you were given, and let the morning come when it comes. 13 practices, and one image beneath all of them. The page written for no one, the boundary stone, the gap before the bell speaks, the angle upstream, the cup pressed flat at dawn, the wall walked before the gate opens, the plain naming, the ridge, the even thread, the emptying room, the cut branch, the stone in the hull, the closing shutter. Set them side by side, and they resolve into a single structure, a fortified place, high up, with one gate, and a man inside it who has finally understood that he is the gatekeeper. The Stoics used that image without embarrassment. Retreat, they said, into yourself. The retreat is always available, requires no travel, costs nothing, and is open at 3 in the morning when nothing else is. Every practice in this book is a repair to that one wall. Nothing enters the citadel unless you carry it in. An old teacher in a market town lay dying, and his former students crowded the room, and one of them asked what they all wanted. After 60 years, could he give them everything in one sentence? He was too tired to be profound. he said. "I was given a part. I played it as well as I could manage. It is finished now, and that is all a part ever does." They waited for more. There was no more, and walking home, one of them realized that the old man had not been summarizing his philosophy. He had been demonstrating it, dying the way he had taught them to live, without protest, without a final flourish, on time. That is the passage we left untouched at the beginning. At the very end of the last notebook, Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, Stoic philosopher of the 2nd century, writing in Greek in a tent he did not expect to leave, set down an image of an actor dismissed from the stage before the play seemed done. 3 acts, he tells himself, can be a complete work. The one who called you on is the one who calls the curtain, and there is no injustice in a full performance ending early, and no dignity in being dragged off complaining. He wrote it to steady himself. It has steadied strangers for 18 centuries. That is what Meditations is, not a treatise anyone composed for you, but the private maintenance notes of a tired man who kept forgetting and kept writing it down again anyway. You may do the same tonight. The page is blank, the hour is late, and the gate is yours. Withdraw into the citadel and shut the gate behind you.